In July 2000, an 8-year-old girl was playing outside near her grandparents' home in a quiet West Sussex village, enjoying the summer holidays like any other child her age would. It was the kind of place where nothing untoward ever happened. Kids played out, families relaxed, and people felt safe. But within the space of a single afternoon, that sense of safety was shattered. Sarah Payne disappeared while playing in a field with her siblings, just a short distance from where her family was staying. One moment she was there, the next she was gone. What followed was one of the largest missing person searches the UK had ever seen, drawing in hundreds of officers, volunteers, and the attention of the entire nation. In this episode of British Murders with Stuart Blues, we're heading to Littlehampton to explore the heartbreaking case of Sarah Payne. It's a story that not only gripped the country, but led to major changes in UK law and the way information about sex offenders is shared. This is a case that still resonates today, and one that began with a summer's day that should have been completely ordinary. Before we start, just a quick reminder to follow the podcast or subscribe on YouTube. It's completely free and one of the best and easiest ways to help the show's growth and support it. If you're able to leave a rating or review, those are always greatly appreciated. And if you want ad-free listening, early access, and exclusive episodes not available on the main feed, join my community, patreon.com/British Murders. This story is one I'm sure the vast majority of you listening will be familiar with. Just hearing the name Sarah Payne no doubt sends an image to your mind of her smiling as she posed for a school photo in her red jumper. Sarah's story is one I've wanted to cover for years, and as a father of a daughter who turns 8 this year, the same age Sarah was when she was killed, it resonates just that bit more with me on a personal level. I can't begin to fathom the level of hurt her family have gone through and still does all these years later. I hope I do Sarah and her family justice with my retelling of her story, and despite me discussing aspects of her killer's background throughout the episode, the focus will remain on her as much as possible. With that, let me now introduce the little girl whose face is known by millions of people throughout the nation for all the wrong reasons. Sarah Evelyn Isabel Payne was born on October 13, 1991 at St Peter's Hospital in Chertsey, which is a town located in the southeast England county of Surrey. She was the third child of Sarah and Michael Payne, and arrived a little later than her due date, 10 days to be precise, but that was typical, because both her older siblings had also arrived late. When she did finally relent from keeping everybody waiting, she was already sporting a tuft of dark hair and a front tooth, which is pretty rare. Only 1 in 2 or 3,000 babies are born with natal teeth. Her dad nicknamed her Princess, which makes sense, because she was the first girl, and that unique father-daughter bond is so special. So the name Princess stuck as sort of a pet one. Another daughter, Charlotte, would then come along a few years later, completing the family. Sarah was a pupil at Burhill Primary School in Hersham, Surrey, and during the story's main timeline, she was finishing year 3 and about to head into year 4 after the 6-week school holidays were over. She had big brown eyes which were really striking. And while she could be stroppy when she didn't get her own way, what kid isn't, she never bore a grudge after a row and would always offer a cuddle to make up. That's so relatable. Her mum, Sarah, described her as being a bubbly and happy character, adding how she was extra special due to being the first girl born into the family for a long time. With nothing but boys before her, the family were not quite used to the girly imagination of Sarah. Adapting to one full of fairies, dolls, and trolls was new territory for everyone. Her interests were vastly different to that of her older brothers, Lee and Luke, and she was very much described as being a girly girl. Her mum and dad recalled how loud she could be at times, and how she was often told to keep it down for fear of the neighbours hearing the racket and wondering what on earth were going on. As a family, tensions did rise from time to time, that's inevitable when you have kids, but they were equally as vocal when playing games together. Such was their strong bond as a family. Sarah being loud wasn't just an attitude thing though, because she actually struggled to hear at times. That was because she had an inherited condition called glue ear. According to the NHS website, that condition relates to a buildup of fluid in the middle ear, which is sometimes due to the eustachian tube, which connects the middle ear and the back of the nose. That wasn't working properly. As a result of that condition, Sarah was partially deaf, so that was more so the reason why she tended to shout. She basically struggled to hear herself if she didn't. Yet despite her condition, she didn't let it dampen her love for music. She loved nothing more than turning the stereo up to full volume and dancing to her heart's full content around the living room. She'd listened to popular bands of the late 90s such as Steps and S Club 7. Her parents often joined in, no doubt questioning their own fitness after the fact. The main timeline of our story began on Saturday, July 1st, 2000. And that month was a pretty average one weather-wise, if not slightly cooler than you'd expect for a midsummer. The temperatures were averaging around 15 degrees Celsius throughout that month, or 59 Fahrenheit. Sarah headed off to work at a local pub that morning with both Charlotte and Sarah, while Michael stayed at home in bed, catching up on his sleep because he'd just come off working a night shift. That arrangement was pretty normal for a Saturday morning, because the two girls both loved to play in the pub's beer garden with a friend of theirs while Mum was busy working. By the afternoon, Sarah's shift was over, so the three of them headed to a property in the small seaside village of Kingston Gorse in Littlehampton, West Sussex. It was there where the girls' granddad Terence Payne, known more commonly as Terry, and his second wife, Leslie, lived. Kingston Gorse is a lovely and quaint seaside area with fields overlooking the sea. So we're talking about some truly stunning views all round, and it's the last place you'd expect what happened to Sarah to occur. Arriving without a hitch, the family of six were greeted with open arms as always. They'd often head over there for the odd Sunday lunch or just to pop in for a visit. And even then on that Saturday, dinner was practically on the table as soon as they arrived. With the initial buzz over, the children soon wanted to head to the beach, as Sarah had promised them they could earlier on in the day. Once there, Terry said he wanted to show Sarah and Michael a house along the beach, because his friend had been doing it up. And it was at that point the parents agreed to let the children play alone on the beach while they looked at the house. To them, there was no danger of allowing such a thing, because the two older boys of the family had been allowed to play on their own in that area for the last few years with nothing bad ever happening, and they knew the area well. The two lads in question, aged 13 and 11, Lee and Luke, had begged their parents to allow the girls to play with them, and they agreed, but only under the condition that the girls do exactly what Lee said, given he was the eldest and therefore the most responsible. Should they get tired, they were told to head back to their grandparents' house. With the terms of play agreed by all parties, off the children went. The last memory Sarah has of Sarah was of her playing with her siblings and screaming her head off, running all over the beach, having the time of her life. As the hours ticked by and early evening drew near, the siblings moved away from the beach and to the cornfields off Kingston Lane. To them, it was an extra cool place to mess around in, given how high the corn stretched towards the sky. Plenty of places to hide from one another. So as you'd expect, they played hide and seek. But things took a turn when Sarah suddenly banged her head. After a subsequent row with her eldest brother, she ran off crying towards her grandparents' home. Lee, being the one who was responsible for everyone, was in hot pursuit, literally 30 seconds behind her. He then turned around to check on 5-year-old Charlotte after she fell over, and once satisfied that she was okay, he turned back around to continue chasing down Sarah. But to his bewilderment, she was nowhere to be seen. Lee would later speak candidly about his regret over this incident, and it broke my heart to hear that he spent so long blaming himself for not being able to save Sarah. He described how, during his teenage years, he repeatedly relived the events of that day. "I did for a few years beat myself up about it," he said. "If I'd maybe run faster or not run through the corn, I might have caught up with her." It's something he said he'll never get over. Luke has also been haunted by the last words he ever spoke to his sister. When she fell during their game and wanted to go home after, he remembers getting angry with her. He revealed this publicly in a 2019 interview with Susanna Reid for the Mail on Sunday, recalling, I said, "Fuck off, go home." Those were the last words I ever said to her. While being only 5 at the time, Charlotte said she too was felt guilt about her sister's death, asking, why was it her and why not me? She added, when something bad like that has happened to someone you love, you almost feel guilty for being alive. As we head back to the timeline, Lee led his siblings back to his grandparents' home, no doubt running as fast as they could. My understanding is that when they arrived, only Leslie was in the house, so it was to her that Lee broke the news about them not knowing where Sarah was. When Terry, Michael and Sarah returned to the house, Leslie was waiting outside for them, tightly holding Charlotte's hand. That instantly set alarm bells off in Sarah's mind, and her parental instincts were no doubt going into overdrive. Leslie asked desperately if the 3 adults had Sarah with them, a last-ditch attempt at hoping she'd somehow wandered off into the arms of her parents. But alas, she was nowhere to be seen. The realization that Sarah was missing suddenly became a stomach-dropping reality. Sarah later recalled how the thought of her daughter being missing was like an echo going through her head. The fear was uncontrollable. The family quickly split up in the hope of finding their eldest daughter, shouting her name even louder than usual in the hope she'd hear their beckoning calls. Sarah and Charlotte walked up the main lane where cars tended to drive, while Terry headed to the beach and Michael to the cornfields. Leslie's role was to stay at the house just in case Sarah suddenly turned up. To disappear without a trace was so far removed from what you'd expect from Sarah, because she was a rather timid girl who would not have strayed far from her siblings. She barely lasted more than a couple of minutes playing hide and seek, so for there to be no sign of her was devastating. She was nowhere to be found after the family searched the area, which led them to think she may have walked across the field and either got lost or injured herself further. Sarah then phoned 999 and informed the police that her daughter was missing. Sarah later described that call as being understandably difficult to do, as it made the whole situation real. A huge search was launched in an attempt to find Sarah after that, with helicopters and over 150 police officers scouring the surrounding areas with the support of locals looking for her. Possibly in an attempt to dispel everyone's worst fears, the police initially said publicly that there was no reason to believe Sarah had been abducted. Even so, every house on the estate was searched by officers, but there was still no sign of her. They also searched many other places, including all of the nearby ditches. They believed she may have wandered off and got lost because she didn't know the area well. Even though it was familiar to a degree, this wasn't where she lived. Former Chief Superintendent of Sussex Police Phil Clark noted there were no signs of Sarah's belongings, adding it was as if she'd suddenly been whisked away. As the search was brought to an end for the night, a moment everyone was dreading, Sarah and Michael finally put the other kids to bed. And when they did, Lee said something to his mum which likely made her heart skip a beat. He pulled her to one side and told her that he knew something, but wasn't sure if he should say or not. Urging him to tell her, Sarah was shocked to hear that Lee had seen a man in a white van while they were out playing, who smiled and waved back at him. The driver was a scruffy-looking man, he said, and he'd spotted the van heading away from the area where Sarah was last seen. But even after hearing that, the idea that Sarah may have been abducted did not enter Sarah's mind. How could it? Nobody expects such an horrible thing to happen. Instead, she lay awake, worried sick, wondering if Sarah had broken a leg and fallen over somewhere and was out there all alone in the dark. The following morning, Sarah left the house early doors on her own and headed straight for the cornfield in which her daughter was last seen. Finding nothing, she collapsed to the floor, overcome by emotion, until a police officer found her and escorted her back to Terry and Leslie's house. The police needed to take some more serious action at this stage, and as far as they were concerned, there were 2 options regarding what had happened to Sarah. The first was the best case scenario, that she'd fallen down a ditch, become lost or something similar. The second was far more sinister. that she was alive but had been abducted. Either way, time was of the essence. Regarding that second potential outcome, officers began mapping the area for known sex offenders, and once they were finished, they had 12 names in total. From that number, they narrowed it down to 3 primary ones, and at the very top of the list was a known pedophile called Roy William Whiting. Now, it begrudges me to do so, but for context purposes, we must now discuss Whiting's background and criminal history. He was 41 during our main timeline, having been born on January 26, 1959, and he originally came from Horsham, that's a market town in West Sussex. One of 6 children, he grew up with his family in Langley Green, a neighbourhood in the West Sussex town of Crawley. Whiting attended Jordan's Junior and Infant School and then Ifield Community College, but left school early as he struggled with his education. That premature departure from the school system led to him taking on a variety of manual labour jobs with several employers. In the 1970s, his parents separated, so a teenage Whiting ended up staying with his dad, going on to train as a mechanic in the 1980s. It was when he was 17 that his mum and dad separated, with the former leaving the family home and going on to remarry. Whiting then secured a role as a mechanic and spent his free time at weekends stock car racing. His previous training had prompted him to work for a firm based in Crawley, but eventually he went on to start his own business, and his interest in banger or stock car racing continued to grow, and it saw him building his own cars and driving for the Gatwick Flyers under the name Flying Fish. He had few female friends until he met a woman called Linda Booker. She was 5 years his junior when he was filling his car at the petrol station where she worked. That chance encounter led to the pair marrying in June 1986, but it was not a marriage made in heaven and only lasted a few years. Whiting went on to be evicted from the garage where he worked because he didn't pay the rent. Money was a common argument topic for Linda and him, it seems. In 1987, Linda gave birth to the couple's son, but Whiting had already left her, and he's had very little contact with the child since then. He had relationships with several women after his marriage ended, including one with someone much younger than him, who, according to his ex-wife, looked like a gangster's moll. But they never lasted. Gangster's moll is an early 1900s slang term for the female companion of a mobster, by the way. Inevitably, Whiting would blame the women for the breakups, and he was also known for telling pointless lies and dreaming up plans which had no chance of coming to fruition. Many relatives and acquaintances saw him as a Walter Mitty type character, as well as a loner. When it comes to his criminal record, it makes for shocking reading. On March 4, 1995, Whiting abducted and sexually assaulted an 8 or 9-year-old girl in the Langley Green area of Crawley. He was identified after a man who knew him came forward when he heard the abductor's car was a red Ford Sierra, which was a vehicle Whiting had just sold. That vehicle was traced and a knife was found hidden inside it. Whiting went on to be convicted of abduction and indecent assault, offences which saw him receive a 4-year prison sentence. Yet despite the horrific ordeal that little girl went through, Whiting hadn't killed her. So for Sarah's family, when they became aware of who Whiting was, they saw that as a very slight glimmer of hope. It wasn't much to go on and was obviously a horrendous situation if that was the case, but it was something. It's interesting to note here that a psychiatrist who assessed Whiting after his conviction said he was likely to re-offend. And sadly, he did. He ended up being released from prison in November 1997 after serving only 2 years and 5 months of his 4-year sentence. But what's even more concerning is that while in prison, he refused to take part in a sex offender rehabilitation program. It was for that reason alone he was forced to serve an extra 5 months before being released on license. Otherwise, he'd have been out after 2 years. Once out of prison, Whiting was placed on the sex offenders register. He was one of the first people to be named on there. He moved away from his native Crawley after that and ended up settling in Littlehampton, the very place Sarah's granddad and his wife lived, the very place from which she went missing. So the reason Whiting's name was at the top of the police's list of people to speak to was due to his previous offence on a child Sarah's age and the fact he lived around 5 miles away from Terry and Leslie's house. Police paid him a visit as early as July 2nd, 2000, the day after Sarah disappeared, but he wasn't at his flat when they arrived that afternoon. They returned that evening, at which point he was in, and spoke with him for about an hour. Officers did return for a third time. Something clearly fell off with this man. But upon seeing him, he fled in his van, which was a 1988 white Fiat Ducato that he'd purchased in June 2000, just over a week before Sarah disappeared. Whiting ended up being stopped by officers and was taken into custody to be questioned. He spent 2 days there, but ultimately, due to a lack of evidence, he wasn't charged with anything and was released on bail. Now, I wondered why he was released on bail if he wasn't charged with anything, but remember, he'd just been released from prison, so he was, I guess, technically on license for the next 2 years out of the 4 that he had left. I assume that's why. But anyway, when they asked him where he was at the time Sarah disappeared, he said he was at a fun fair in Brighton, around 24 miles east of Littlehampton, also on the south coast. The inference a police officer at the time gathered was that Whiting was cruising the areas young people might have been in his newly acquired van. It was on July 3rd, 2000 when the nation was made aware of what had happened down in Littlehampton. That photo we all know showing Sarah's smiling face was displayed everywhere, in the papers, on the news, and her parents made daily appeals via both mediums, pleading for their daughter's safe return. They even appealed directly to her, saying, "We've got lots of people, hundreds, Sarah. You couldn't believe how many people are coming, and it won't be long." Police and numerous volunteers continually scoured the areas around Littlehampton, with specialist units, including military personnel, joining the search effort. People who specialised in seeing if areas had recently been burnt or areas of ground disturbed were also drafted in. Another officer came forward with further information on Whiting, which only cemented his place at the top of the police's suspects list. The search quickly turned into a huge nationwide one, and over 10,000 phone calls offering information were made by members of the public. Lee even took part in an identity parade in Brighton which involved Whiting and another man who'd been arrested, yet he was unable to identify the former. Sarah's parents were told to make a to-go bag full of clothes just in case the police found her and needed to check the clothes she was found in for forensic evidence. That bag contained many of her clothes, including fresh nighties and summer dresses, along with a book she was reading just before she went missing. It's the one she'd been reading in the car on the journey to Kingston Gorse. Sarah's last known movements were reenacted by 4 local kids, each one portraying one of the Payne siblings, and it led to over 800 calls being made on the back of it. Some of those leads included a potential sighting of a little girl spotted crying in the toilets at Knutsford Services on the M6 in Cheshire. She had introduced herself to a concerned member of the public as simply Sarah, and with that, Sarah knew instantly it wasn't her daughter, because she always introduced herself using her full name of Sarah Payne. Police soon after released an e-fit of the man seen with that girl at Knutsford Services, which led to officers receiving calls from Greece, Spain, France, even as far afield as Israel. Sussex police ended up confirming that the girl was not Sarah after reviewing CCTV footage. As the investigation continued, the family were asked directly by officers if the name Roy Whiting meant anything to them, which it didn't. Meanwhile, Sarah's 3 siblings were struggling to cope with it all. Lee could often be found punching and kicking a tree in an attempt to alleviate his anger, and in his head he kept seeing the image of that van driver waving at him as he drove away. Charlotte became so anxious that she metaphorically glued herself to her mum, never leaving her side. She asked if someone had taken Sarah and when they would give her back. In the background, a now bailed Whiting did not return to his flat, instead opting to go and live with his father back in Crawley. By that point, police had found a receipt for fuel purchased at Buck Barn Garage on the A24 near Pulborough. That receipt, which was tied to Whiting, directly contradicted his alibi that he'd been at a fun fair at 5:30 p.m. and was home by 9:30 p.m. Then, the news everyone had been dreading finally came in. On Monday, July 17, 2000, a discovery was made in a field in the aforementioned village of Pulborough in West Sussex. That morning, a farm worker who was walking in the fields near Brinsbury Agricultural College at Pulborough found a body no more than 10 yards from the A29. The body, found approximately 15 to 18 miles from Kingston Gorse, was that of a young girl matching Sarah's description. She was naked, and a subsequent post-mortem showed she had suffered a violent death, with most of her hair having been pulled out during the attack. The news was delivered to the Payne family that afternoon, with the suggestion being that they believed the body was Sarah's. DNA testing was soon carried out and confirmed that the body was indeed that of Sarah Payne. Sarah and Detective Sergeant Sean Scott, who'd grown close to the family during the investigation, argued back and forth about her seeing Sarah's body. DS Scott urged Sarah not to see it, while she had the opposite opinion. He ended up agreeing to describe what she looked like to Sarah, but I won't be going into such detail within this episode. It's simply too heartbreaking to read, let alone say out loud. Sarah ended up agreeing not to see her daughter's body after that, and it had a massive impact on DS Scott. It changed him, seeing her body. Due to the condition of it, having been left out in the open for so long, it was difficult to establish a precise cause of death, though it was suggested as likely being asphyxiation, probably strangulation, or suffocation, perhaps a combination of both. Sarah's family took some semblance of comfort from being told she was confirmed to not have been raped. However, it could not be ruled out that Sarah had been interfered with in other ways. A few days later, on July 20th, Sarah's shoe was recovered from the side of the road in the village of Coolham, roughly 3 miles from Pulborough. A motorist had driven past the black sandal with a Velcro strap for several days before finally stopping, and when she eventually did, she made the correct decision by not picking it up. Instead, she phoned the police, and that shoe would go on to become one of the most important parts of the case. It's also worth noting that a group of campers said they heard a little girl scream 3 miles from where Sarah's body was eventually found on the night she was abducted. 2 young couples said they were concerned about the screams, but did not attach sufficient importance to them. Yet, they still came forward after realising their campsite at Fittleworth was so close to Pulborough. Regarding the shoe, Sarah positively identified it as belonging to her daughter, and the hopes of finding some kind of fibre or DNA sample from her killer gave the investigation a new lease of life. On July 23rd, Whiting, who was under surveillance, stole a Vauxhall Nova in Crawley, a crime which was caught on a dashcam. He ended up in a high-speed cat-and-mouse chase with officers who were in hot pursuit, but it ended abruptly when Whiting crashed into a parked police car while trying to escape. I'll talk more on that incident shortly. Forensic ecologist Professor Patricia Wilson, a name I'm sure many of you are familiar with, was also brought in around that time to help after the police contacted her for advice. She ended up visiting the cornfield where Sarah was last seen and began to piece together an ecological profile of the area using her expert knowledge of plants, pollen, and soil. Once Sarah's body had been found, Patricia was able to compare her results with information she collected off the body. That led to her determining that Sarah had been killed where she was found, rather than being killed elsewhere and dumped there. Professor Wiltshire said years later, "That's an important thing, because sometimes murderers move bodies, but that was her primary resting place." Then, on August 12, 2000, Sarah's funeral took place at St. Peter's Church, in a ceremony consisting of only family, close friends, and a few invited guests. Before the Reverend took his address, teacher June Whittle, who was close to Sarah, gave a personal reflection on her life and death. The Sarah we knew was always smiling, she said. Happy and chirpy. Her smile was a great big sparkling one. Sarah added, "We are grateful to all those who worked so hard to find her, the police and their staff, the public who offered to help, and the media who supported the effort with such care and dignity." Now, about that car crash I discussed a short while ago, Whiting was convicted on charges of car theft and dangerous driving, and so found himself back in prison, having been handed a 22-month sentence. While inside, officers took the chance to question him again about Sarah's disappearance, and also used it as an opportunity for a forensic team to search his van. Inside, police found sweets, toys, rope hidden behind a curtain, knives, baby oil, and cable ties. Clearly, this was a predatory kit used as a means of detaining his victims. The forensic evidence recovered from the van linked Whiting to Sarah's murder, and that was so important because he'd never admitted to being in the presence of Sarah, so it was clear he was hiding something. During questioning, he reportedly showed evidence of being stressed, something noted due to his constant chain smoking. The evidence in question was as follows. Sarah's loose hair was found to contain over 200 material fibres, and some of these came from a sweater found in Whiting's van. Further fibres on Sarah's lost shoe were found to match the passenger seat cover in the van, and Sarah's hair was also found on the sweater. It was theorised by officers that Sarah managed to throw one shoe out of the window as a cry for help. Talk about heartbreaking. That shoe was the only item of Sarah's clothing ever recovered. A strand of blonde hair was also found on a t-shirt in the van and was also subjected to DNA testing. The results showed there was a 1 in a billion chance of it belonging to anyone other than Sarah Payne. Professor Wiltshire also found pollen from plants such as the hedge and stinging nettles near Sarah's shallow grave on Whiting's red jumper, which added to the mounting evidence. She theorised it must have been dark when Whiting was at the location, as he didn't seem to see the nettles he'd have had to walk through. Patricia also believes that Whiting fell over, because he had the pollen not only on his front from leaning over, but also on his back. With all that evidence now gathered, Whiting was finally charged with the abduction and murder of Sarah on February 6, 2001. It had taken 7 months, but detectives now finally had their man. Appearing in Lewis Crown Court, he pleaded not guilty to both charges and was remanded in custody. On the first anniversary of Sarah's disappearance, July 1, 2001, her family hosted a memorial in an attempt to help with their grief. Hundreds of friends and relatives then gathered on Goring Beach in Worthing, West Sussex to remember her, something which had the full backing of Sarah's parents, although they didn't attend. Whiting's murder trial began 9 months after he was charged, opening on November 14, 2001 at Lewis Crown Court before Mr. Justice Curtis. Lee bravely gave evidence during that trial, recalling how he'd seen a scruffy man with yellowish teeth driving through Kingston Gorse on the evening Sarah went missing. The jury saw photographs of the contents of Whiting's van and heard from 2 motorists who recalled seeing such a white van parked up at the roadside. That was near the site where Sarah's body was later recovered, and it was on the evening of July 1, 2000. Upon the trial's conclusion after 4 weeks, Whiting was convicted of the abduction and murder of Sarah Payne and was handed a life sentence. The trial judge stated it was a rare case in which a life sentence should truly mean life. Yet it's important to note that he was sentenced before the whole life order was introduced in the Criminal Justice Act 2003. It's been noted that had he been sentenced with the rules as they are now, he probably would have received a whole life order as a starting point. And his time spent in prison has been far from uneventful as well, especially when it comes to him being a target for other prisoners to make a name for themselves. On August 4, 2000, Whiting was attacked at HMP Wakefield by convicted murderer Ricky Tregaskis, who used a razor as his weapon of choice. The attack left Whiting with a 6-inch scar on his right cheek. Tregaskis received an additional 6-year sentence for the assault. Later that year, on November 24th, then Home Secretary David Blunkett ordered that Whiting must serve a minimum of 50 years in prison, making him ineligible for parole until 2051, at which point he'd be 92. But fast forward to June 9th, 2010, and on that day a High Court judge actually reduced Whiting's minimum term by 10 years, taking it down to 40. Sarah attended that hearing and described the decision as disappointing. In July of 2011, Whiting was attacked again at HMP Wakefield, this time by twice convicted murderer Gary Vinter. The weapon of choice this time was a sharpened toilet brush handle which Vinter used to stab Whiting in the eye. He ended up being treated at Pinderfields Hospital, having stitches applied to his wound, and the plastic shard which were lodged in there was removed. Vinter admitted wounding with intent and received an indefinite sentence with a minimum term of 5 years. On November 8, 2018, Whiting was stabbed once again in his cell, this time by a duo of fellow prisoners, Kevin Hayden and Richard Prendergast. They burst into Whiting's cell at around 6:12 p.m. after he'd returned from collecting his evening meal. Hayden used a screw as a weapon, while Prendergast used 2 pieces of wood with a 6.7 centimeter screw protruding from them. They called Whiting a nonce, and Hayden shouted, stab him, get him in the neck," during the assault. Whiting suffered wounds to his chest, back, and other areas on that occasion, and was treated in hospital before being returned to prison. Both attackers received an additional 7.5 years each on top of their existing sentences. Another 6 years would pass, but inevitably, Whiting was stabbed again on February 11, 2024, this time by fellow inmate Andrew Light. Light entered Whiting's cell and lunged at him repeatedly with a sharpened chunk of wood. And as officers held him back after the attack, he shouted, "See you later, Roy. That's for Sarah Payne." Whiting was taken to the hospital and treated, with his injuries being described as minor. Once cleared and in a stable position, he was returned to prison. As we approach the end of this episode, it wouldn't be right if we didn't discuss Sarah's Law. Inspired by Megan's Law in the USA, Sarah's Law, which is officially known as the Child Sex Offender Disclosure Scheme, gives parents, carers, and guardians the right to ask police whether someone who has contact with their child has any record of child sexual offences. If a risk is identified, police can disclose that information to whoever is best placed to protect the child. Additionally, even if a person has never been convicted of anything, police can still disclose information if they hold intelligence suggesting that person poses a risk of harm to children. It's important to note, though, that you can only inquire about a specific named person in relation to a specific child, so it's not like you can use it to do a general check on someone willy-nilly without a particular concern. The law has been tightened a lot since its inception, to the point where sex offenders' fingerprints can now be taken every year, along with photographs of them. These all help in protecting children in the UK from predators. Sarah said during the campaign, "I just couldn't imagine how a man could have a previous conviction for hurting a child and still be living in a village with children. Still be living in a seaside town, for God's sake." Before Sarah's Law came into effect, the police couldn't move a sex offender from places such as schools because it was a human right to stand where they pleased. Ridiculous, I know. Sarah's parents and the News of the World campaigned for the change in law, and the former tabloid newspaper helped Sarah publish their infamous Name and Shame campaign, in which the names of pedophiles were published. Now, that campaign could take up a whole episode on its own, so feel free to go down that rabbit hole if you so wish. As for the lasting memory of Sarah Payne, not only does she have a new law named after her, but she also had a statue installed at her former school, Burhill Primary, in 2002. Sarah herself has had a few health struggles since her daughter was abducted and killed, culminating in a stroke in 2009. She was in a coma for some time and underwent multiple intensive surgeries. Then, in 2012, she was reported as being gravely ill once more due to complications from her previous brain surgeries. Yet despite her struggles, Sarah has tirelessly campaigned for change, as we've just discussed, and I honestly can't commend that woman enough for everything she's done. She ended up being awarded an MBE and has spent time working as a victim's champion, tirelessly pushing for Sarah's law to allow parents to check if sex offenders live in their area. The ripple effect of Sarah's murder not only had an impact on her siblings, which I'll come on to shortly, but also on her parents' relationship. Sarah and Michael ended up getting a divorce in August 2003 following the immense strain of their daughter's murder and the subsequent media attention. The pair did remain good friends though, and Sarah has since gone on to welcome a fifth child, another daughter, to the world. But sadly, in 2014, Michael was found dead at his home in Kent, aged just 45, after struggling with depression and alcoholism. His children shared kind words on social media about their father in his passing, and one user on Twitter, as it was known at the time, said, "R.I.P. Michael Payne, reunited with your beautiful Sarah at last." Sarah's eldest brother Lee has described the grief as something that will never completely go away, but that he has learned to manage on a day-by-day basis. He said coming to terms with Sarah's death is still something that happens daily, and that there will never be a day when he will think he's fully over it. Luke has spoken openly about being unable to sleep due to his memories, describing how his mind creates imagined scenarios of what might have happened. He told Channel 5 for the 2017 documentary Sarah Payne, A Mother's Story, "I'm scared to sleep at night half the time, so I work myself solid until I pretty much drop. It's fears of what's there when I close my eyes." He added, "I dread the night because it's just you and your thoughts." As for Charlotte, she said she suffers from anxiety and, until turning 18, was too scared to even go out of the house sometimes. Regarding Sarah, Charlotte said she believes she was put on this earth to help her mum create Sarah's law. May she rest in peace. Thanks so much for listening to British Murders with Stuart Blues. For ad-free listening, early access and exclusive episodes, go join my community at patreon.com/British Murders. Following the podcast or subscribing on YouTube is another great way to support the show. It's a quick thing, it's free, and it helps British Murders reach even more listeners. And if you're able to leave a rating or review, please do so. Those are greatly appreciated. That's it for now. Until next time, cheerio.